Looks like we are streaming. Hello, welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to a deepening on the Persian Bayan. This is session number 11, and we are on Vahid 13, Bob 1, I believe.
8.
Right?
Vahid VIII.
Sorry. Yeah. Vahid 8.
Roman numerals, right?
Yes.
Who thought we'd have to use those again after elementary school?
Pages 416 to 490, and it says it's 74 pages, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, let me pull up the notes and then we can get going. Okay, does everyone see the notes?
Beautiful. That's just me.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Although they're a little fuzzy too. Maybe the fuzziness is on your end.
Maybe. Let's see. All right. I think we are good to go. Peter, if you would.
Well, welcome back. Thank you very much for giving me a little break to deal with health issues. And so there are two possibilities that present themselves when people postpone a reading program. One is that they get caught up in other things and are not prepared for the next session because they don't do any reading and they get sort of behind in the reading. Another thing that happens is people get caught up and they think, oh, well, actually they're really happy because they were chapters behind, and every single time there was that we went through something together, they felt like, oh no, I haven't read that yet. So there could be some of you that are in either camp, and hopefully we can go about this a little gently and not try to do all of Vahid VIII tonight. We'll just do what is comfortable for us. So I'm not going to pace this very fast. And I want to make sure that Jeremiah stops me 15 minutes before we're to end, at least 15 minutes. Maybe we call it 20 minutes, so that any questions that people haven't asked prior to then, they have plenty of time to ask. Okay? So one thing that I wanted to bring to your attention is that Baha'is invariably notice that there's a fair amount of numerical symbolism, which has various connotations in Islamic theology and mysticism. It's regarded as an Islamic science or a Quranic science. It's called hurufat. It's also called abjad. It actually derives from probably from a process that's used in mystical Judaism. I say that because it was being used among Jews long before it was taken up by Muslims. It was not very much used by Christians. There are a few sort of arcane groups that dabbled in it, but for the most part, a lot used by Jews and then also by Muslims. And in particular, it was kind of a favorite of mystically inclined Muslims. So not necessarily Sufis, but various groups of Muslims who are very attracted to mysteries and esoterica. And so a couple of comments on this. One is that Baha'u'llah doesn't go much into that. He does explain some of the numerology of the Bab, and by not talking about a lot of it, that's part of his response to numerology. What he talks about is what's important. And I think that it's important for us to remember when we're trying to decipher the meaning of the Bob's words is what he said himself about how to do that. And he's very emphatic about it in at least 2 or 3 passages that we've already read. What he said is that the only one who knows the true meaning of the Persian Bayan, of its words, is me and him whom God shall make manifest. So we're in very good hands when we consider that most of us have read much of the Baha'i writings, thought deeply about them. We should not feel that we are handicapped in deciphering what these teachings of the Bab are all about. Now, handicapped and beginners are two different things. We are beginners, no question about it, because the Bab's writings have not been systematically studied in the Baha'i community. There are individual scholars who've done magnificent work. I mean, Todd Lawson is probably the #1 on my list, but also Armin Eshrachi has done also excellent work, and there are a number of others. But, and Stephen Lambden also, and these people, and I will make sure that I give you your websites and whenever possible, even bibliographies, so that after we're finished studying the Persian Bayan, you have plenty of places to go to learn more about the writings of the Bab and the concepts that are found in those writings and the different ways in which he expresses those concepts. So I think you all should give yourselves an enormous pat on the back that you've stuck with it, because this is what is mostly required for studying the Bab. You have to stick with it. You have to continue to go, and you have to read things sometimes many times over before it gets to you, where the deeper meaning comes forth. And correlation is so important. One of the reasons why this book is so important to read from beginning to end is that he approaches the same themes over and over, but in different words. And those words talk to us. They speak to us in different ways. And sometimes we have to hear, well, all know this because, we've had conversations with somebody and the person says something one way, you don't get it. Second way, you don't get it. Next time you see it, they say it again. Oh, that's what you meant. Okay. So the Bab knows that we're like that. Okay. He knows. And this is why there's so much so-called repetition. But if you look at his repetition, not a single phrase is repeated. It's not exact. It's a variation on a theme. I'm a musician. This is great music. This is like symphonic music, tremendous development of themes, and then coming back to those themes over and over again. So let's first, if anybody has a question that they want to ask before we dive in, please go ahead, raise your hand, and let's do it. By the way, for some reason, I don't know why, the only person I see on my screen is Lucinda. Everybody else has disappeared. Now, why do you suppose that is, Mr. Jeremiah?
That's because she's the only one that has her video on. So that's why you're seeing that. But I would like to also add that if you could raise your hands, that would be great as far as organizing who gets to go first or ask their question first. The second thing is if you would also write your questions and either send them to the group or send them to me. This way we can build a timeline of when the questions were asked, so it's easier for referencing in the video later. So
yeah, I think that's really a terrific idea. I also think it's very important to raise a hand so that Jeremiah can keep track of what the order is, and he can unmute people one at a time, because otherwise it's a little awkward because we don't know whether we should jump in or not. It's better for him to say, okay, go ahead. It's your turn.
Very good. So if there aren't any other questions, I guess we can go on.
So as you see from these notes for Vahid VIII, the Bab uses the symbolism. He uses symbolism of things that are right around us all the time. And of course, this is intentional. It's much easier for us to remember metaphysical realities when we have physical realities to remind us of the metaphysical ones. And here, consistently, he talks about the manifestation of God as like the sun, the first to believe in him, or his chosen viceroy is the moon, and all the other followers are like stars. And of course, Baha'u'llah gives somewhat different meanings to these same terms in Kitab-i-Igan, and we shouldn't worry about that. The words of God have multiple meanings, and it is particularly the manifestations who understand what those meanings are and can express them to us. So in this context, it's very interesting that this symbolism is used because, as you know from reading the talks of Abdu'l-Baha and reading some of his tablets and also writings of Baha'u'llah, the image of the sun as being the manifestation is found all over the place, all over the place. It's very consistent. And of course, all of the symbolism associated with the sun is of particular importance. One of the things that I thought was very interesting was that the Babi calendar, which then became the Baha'i calendar, is a solar calendar. This is intentional. This is one of the ways in which he references the manifestation of God as being the source of all things. The source, because the source of our connection with God, with our Creator. And there are a number of other things that we'll get to eventually. Then it talks about the fact that there is a chosen person. The first person to believe in the manifestation of God is not whoever happens to be sitting around at the time. That's not it. That's not. We have to understand that God chooses that person. That person has been chosen for that honor and that rank. And so the first person to recognize Muhammad, Ali, the first of the Imams. The first one to recognize the Bab, Mullah Hussein, called the Babul Bab, the gate to the gate. And who is the first to recognize Baha'u'llah? Abdu'l-Baha. We know this from a number of accounts that as his young son, he was the first man, the first male to recognize Baha'u'llah. The first woman being, of course, Tahirih. Except we don't know much about Asiya Khanum. It's possible that his wife recognized him before. But the first woman to be recognized in the Baha'i literature as having understood that Baha'u'llah was a manifestation was Tahirih. And hence the very, very special relationship between Tahirih and Baha'u'llah, and also between Tahirih and Abdu'l-Baha. There are some very special stories about that. Sometime you'll encounter those. So let's go on to Bab 2. All right, now for the purposes of our understanding, you have two groups of numerical symbols here. You have 19, which we have gone over because 19 is Wahid or Vahid, and it means oneness, means one. And its numerical value is 19. So we've been through that, but now we have this other phenomenon, which is very interesting, and it's reflected in the Baha'i, the plan of inheritance that's found in the Kitab-i-Aqdas. Now, someday this is worth a study all to itself, because Baha'is know that we have the option of drawing up our own will and testament. And so we don't usually study or pay much attention to the one that Baha'u'llah recommended. Maybe we might change our minds in the future. That's what I'm thinking, because I mean, he is the supreme manifestation, and this is with one or two small changes. It is the same as the one found in the Persian Bayan in Vahid VIII, Bab 2. So interesting, I think, to all of us in this listing of categories of inheritance, is it includes the teacher. And in particular, we're talking about the spiritual teacher, the person who brought this person to the faith. Now, of course, it doesn't just mean that, but this is the principal reason that it is included in the inheritance, because that person brought this person to spiritual life, to a life of being a Babi, in that case, being a Baha'i in the case of the Kitab-i-Aqdas. Then you see now the eighth note speaks of the Sirat, and it talks about the wise people, perspicacious people are more rare than red sulfur. We've encountered these words before in previously in the Persian Bayan. The fact that he was interpreting Quranic terms and giving them new meanings and meanings that created bridges between the Quran and the Persian Bayan, between Islam and the Babi faith. It's very interesting and notable that he continues to do this in the Persian Bayan, even though he's introduced the description of a number of symbolic terms in the Quran earlier in Persian Bayan. He comes back to it. And then, as he also has talked about the speed of his revelation, the intensity of the revelation that has come to him. And we've heard him talk about that, of how many verses he can reveal in an hour, and that sort of a theme. He comes back to it here. We're getting very close to the end of the Persian Bayan, and he's come back to this. It's almost like to remind us, by the way, remember that thing I told you a while back? Don't forget it. It's important. And the fact that it is important is reiterated by Baha'u'llah, who in one of his tablets says that we have revealed as many verses as the Bab. The difference being is that Baha'u'llah continued to reveal verses without cessation, without ever stopping, between 1852 and 1892. 40 years of revelation, whereas the Bab only had very short time. He had 6 years and he didn't actually have a full 6 years to reveal verses. And so the speed at which he revealed verses is actually perhaps related to the fact that he had very little time on earth to do that. Let's go on to Bab 3. I'm trusting that I'm not going to read these all aloud because you all read very fine and you can read them for yourself. And if there's something that are in the notes that you don't understand, you have questions about, or you will have a comment, then please make note of that or bring it up right now if you wish. A lot of these things.
Peter, excuse
Yes.
me.
Yeah.
I'm hearing some rattling or scratching or something. Is there?
Rattling or scratching?
Yeah, it sounds like something's hitting the mic or close to it.
Oh, really?
Laptop.
Maybe am I too close to the mic?
No, I mean your volume sounds good. It's just there was a constant like noise that was hitting, and
Really? Okay,
Well,
still? You're
no,
still?
I'm not hearing it now.
Oh, okay. You know what I did? I backed up about 4 inches.
Okay, all right. Sorry,
And it
it was
just
a little
occurred to me,
distracting.
I'm in a kind of a small room, and there's metal in this room. And I have a very resonant voice. And my voice may very well be pinging off the metal.
Okay.
Okay. So let me try this distance. I'm now about 1.5 feet from the mic. And if you need more space, then don't hesitate to tell me and I'll back up even further. So, I'm not reading these aloud. I'm bringing out different themes that are either implied in these particular notes or that are in addition to these notes. But very often in these themes, we're seeing a repetition of things that the Bob has brought up before. I think it's very interesting that he talks about this being endowed with spiritual life, that's being spiritualized, that it doesn't just come from the manifestation, but it comes from the people that he has appointed to be the leaders, interpreters, and successors to his religion. Now, this really sets the stage for the covenant of Baha'u'llah. Because in the covenant of Baha'u'llah, Baha'u'llah appointed a specific individual to have that authority. And by implication and various other verses that he wrote, that person was now endowed with the capacity to appoint somebody to succeed him. So the succession is a bit different because nowhere does the Bob actually say that the letter of the living have the power to appoint people who will be infallible interpreters. It says they can appoint successors, but successors and interpreters of the word that have authority, that's two different things. To say that someone is inspired and they're receiving divine assistance is one. To say that they are perfect and they always get it right, that's a whole nother ballgame. But I think that the Bob here is preparing the Babis to recognize that there's going to be a covenant. He doesn't use the word covenant anywhere in the Persian Bayan, but the covenant is implied all over the place. And of course, one of the meanings of the covenant is the prediction of the coming of a future manifestation. Well, clearly that's done. We find that theme over and over again in the Persian Bayan. And here we have another aspect of the covenant, that he's appointing people and giving them some authority to serve as spiritual leaders for the community, which basically means they're not abandoned. They're not on their own. They don't have to it's not fully fledged as and airtight as the Baha'i covenant. But frankly, my friends, nothing has been before Baha'u'llah. Abdu'l-Baha made this point in a number of his talks. There's no covenant that has come to exist in religious history that is as airtight as the Baha'i covenant, because it was always subject to interpretation, somebody else's interpretation, you see? And because of that, you had fissures, you had disagreements, you had schisms in the religion from the very beginning. That was certainly true in Islam. It was true in Christianity, and it was true in the religion of the Bab as well. There were 25 people, according to Abdu'l-Baha, 25 people who claimed to be him whom God shall make manifest before Baha'u'llah claimed. So let's move on to the next four. Yeah, this is a very interesting thing here. The Bab in number 15 there, the Bab talks about something that has been a matter of debate in religious communities for millennia, and that is, what's more important, believing in the manifestation or following his laws? And some people say following his laws is the most important, and they neglect the devotional aspect. They neglect the affective. They don't have a close relationship with the manifestation, okay? It's all by the book. You got to follow the book. If you don't follow the book, you're out. And then you have other people who just, they're in love with the manifestation, or at least they imagine that they are. And all those laws, well, that's for somebody else. That's for the people who don't really know him personally, do not have a personal, to use the Christian idea, they don't have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. So therefore, they need all those laws. The Bab makes it very clear right here in Vahid VIII, Bab 4. You need both. Both are necessary, and Baha'u'llah reaffirms this in the very beginning of the Kitab-i-Aqdas. It's as if, no, we have to make sure that these guys understand from day one, this is the way it works. It's recognition, it's irfan, which is mystical knowledge. It's a mystical relationship with the manifestation, and it's obedience to laws. Those two things cannot be separated from each other. So let's go on to 5. Oh, yes. Now, as much fun as it is to dabble in the numerology of the Bab, it's just as fun to dabble in his ideas about jewels and about colors and about talismans. And I do not mean, I hope you understand that I do not mean to denigrate this sort of an interest. I just want to affirm that it's not of central importance. We should not become so enthusiastic about these sort of things that we miss the teachings of the Bab that are really fundamental to demonstrating the unity between the Bab's religion and our religion, the religion of Baha'u'llah. They are inseparable. They are one faith, really. But sometimes when you get caught up in all this sort of stuff, the esoteric stuff, it seems like, well, no, the Bab had a whole completely different religion out there, and they were doing all kinds of wacky stuff. It's not wacky. It wasn't wacky to people back then. It's wacky to us. We live in such a different era, and so we come from such a different culture. In 6, he talks about hygiene. Hygiene is a big deal in the Bab's writings, especially in the Persian Bayan. Cleanliness. personal appearance, wearing clean clothes, paring your nails. He goes into quite some detail. You might wonder why. What's the significance of all this? Well, actually, Baha'u'llah does too, but he does it in more subtle ways for the most part. Not always. For example, in the Kitab-i-Aqdas, he actually talks about don't go and bathe in one of those disgusting Persian baths where nobody changes the water because you'll get sick and you won't get clean. So, but Baha'u'llah does not go into it in so much detail, but he talks about refinement. This is refinement, folks. This is the Bab wants to raise the level of consciousness of humanity as a whole, so that the level of hygiene, cleanliness, purity, and beauty, and sweet smelling that is enjoyed by the richest, the most privileged people in the world will become universal. It will become the attribute of all of humanity. And so I think we should see this as one of the indications of the whole theme in the Babi and Baha'i writings of bringing all of humanity up to the highest level of perfection. And it's very much related to perfection too, to the idea that whatever you do, do it the best. And and right here in note 19, you see, he relates it specifically. He talks about the tattoos, which, because they're talking about henna here, they're talking about henna tattoos. They're not talking about, you know, the kind of tattoos you go and get from the tattoo artists. They didn't have those machines then. If you were to have some kind of an actual tattoo on your body, it involved a lot of painful cutting. And in his writings, he said that the mutilation of the flesh is not permitted. So presumably that kind of tattooing was never approved by the Bab. But henna is a different story. Henna is very beautiful and it's not permanent. And it has a long, long tradition in the Middle East. It was used to beautify the body long before even Islam came into existence. And if any of you have gone and traveled in the Middle East, or you've gone on pilgrimage, you may have actually seen some people wearing henna. Women usually, but in this case, the Bab was approving the use of henna as well for men. Mind you, you'll notice it's not to put henna on your hands or your face. This is the popular use of henna now. It's even the traditional use. It is to put henna in your private part of your body that is only seen by your spouse. So clearly, the henna is supposed to be attractive to your spouse, and what is written are words of God. They're praises of God. So you also see in 20, he talks about the more attentive to cleanliness we are, the better. And if we're not in a position in 21 to bathe ourselves, we should be at least washing our clothes very regularly. That may seem strange, but if you're traveling across the desert hundreds of miles, you may have to choose between washing your clothes or washing your body, because you only get to an oasis from time to time, and you only have limited water. And it's let's go then to 7. Again, we're talking about the beautiful handwriting in the copies of the Persian Bayan. And then in 8, Now, this is an interesting difference between the Bab and Baha'u'llah. The Bab allowed believers to shave part or whole of their head and of their beard. But the purpose was so that their hair would come back stronger. It was not that they're going to go around with a shaved head all the time. And it wasn't that they were going to go around with a shaved beard all the time. The idea was you do that in order to strengthen your hair so it will come out more beautifully. And this is more, shall I put it, it's more harmonious with the Islamic practice, where there were certain times, like for pilgrimage, where there would be shaving of the head. As you probably know, in the Kitab-i Aqdas, Baha'u'llah is very emphatic about believers not shaving their heads, period. But doesn't have any problem with their shaving their beards. They can have a beard of any kind or none at all. And as we found in both Baha'u'llah and the Bab, do not explain such things. And by the way, I highly recommend someday that you read Maimonides, the great Jewish philosopher and theologian, who wrote a book called A Guide for the Perplexed. And the purpose of the Guide for the Perplexed was to explain all of those things that are very difficult to understand to a young person who was really intent on studying Judaism deeply and understanding the Bible deeply. And Maimonides was an extraordinary intellect and had a perfect understanding of his own scriptures, and not only of the scriptures, but also of the Talmud, which are the commentaries. And one of the things that he talks about is that there are laws of God which are never explained to us, and they exist in every dispensation, and every prophet reveals such laws. And so we need to understand that we can understand some, and others we can't. And that's part of our challenge as human beings, is to have the humility to give up and not to insist on trying to decipher what's never explained, because we won't find out from anybody but the manifestation. Very interesting that his idea of a will and testament, as you see from 9, the will and testament for the Bab is not simply, Joe is going to get my encyclopedias and Lily is going to get my bathrobe. And, it's not dividing physical property. This is the least important thing that a person needs to do at the end of their life. What they need to do is attest to their life of the spirit. And this is what he requires. Every Babi is to write about his experience before and after he became a Babi, so that this can be preserved by his descendants in perpetuity. Now, there were Babis and there have been Baha'is who have followed this admonition. And to them, we are very grateful, because we know quite a bit about people's lives. We know quite a bit about what they did, not just a few people, but what quite a few people did. So the history of the cause, as those biographies and those chronicles are published and translated, the history of the cause is going to become more and more rich for our understanding. And we have this commandment of the Bab to thank for that, because most people do not feel moved or even permitted to write about themselves, especially when they become a believer in a new religion. They have all kinds of reasons not to write about their experience. But here he very clearly says it's important for you to do this, and that it be treasured and preserved by your descendants. Then in this is in 10, we have an intimation of what we will see boldly stated by Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha, which is men and women are equal, period. Okay? And different, but equal. And here's one of the ways in which he introduces this concept in a way that's very subtle, is that every believer is permitted to talk to any other person. There is nothing holding you back. Now, this was not the case before the Bab. There were all sorts of rules and regulations about who a man could speak to, who a woman could speak to. Generally speaking, you were only allowed to talk to those members of your family, close members of your family, who were of the other gender. And as far as outside of your family, generally speaking, it was forbidden because it was believed that it was going to lead to infidelity. And if not to infidelity, at least to the image, the semblance of possible infidelity. And because that was such a threat to the community as a whole, then it was forbidden altogether. But as we see, in 10, he's permitting it. And I thought it was very interesting that when you're speaking with an unbeliever, with somebody who doesn't believe in the Bab, he wants you to be brief, be succinct. You can go and exercise that in your mind and try to figure out why he would say that. I haven't a clue, but I think it's simply an interesting thing to note that he regarded brevity as very important. And in fact, I do remember a passage of Baha'u'llah that's translated by the Guardian in the Gleanings that talks about how silence is golden and brevity of speech is approved. So that may be connected to this statement in Bab 10. In Bab 11, the whole thing, I think the whole thing, let me see. Let's see beyond 32 if I'm wrong about this. No, basically, he's until note 32, you will see that the themes that he's treating in this Bab 11 are all about burial. The different rites of burial, some of those are found in the Kitabi Aqdas. Some of them have been left to the Universal House of Justice to determine in the future. I think that one of the things to note about this is that the Bab did have specific rites and rituals that had to do with the burial, the preparation of the body for burial, and then their actual burial. This distinguishes his religion from Islam, clearly, because in Islam, you have one set of rules in the Sharia having to do with the dead and how to handle them. This is a completely different set of rules. And, you know, if there was, in every time, there are always people who try to play both ends of the fence, you know, both sides of the fence. They tried to, they were Muslims who were very attracted to the Babi religion. maybe they even wanted to believe in the Bab, but they didn't dare. And then there are people who, who believed in the Bab, but who wanted to keep certain Islamic practices because they were important to themselves or they were important to their family. There are all these different gradations of sort of between one faith confession and another. The Bab is very definite in the Persian Bayan, is that these are the new standard, and those who believe in me should follow this standard. Let's go to the next one. I know somebody's going to ask me, how about these 5 degrees of unity? And I'm going to say, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe one of my friends who has spent a lifetime studying the writings of the Bab has some light to shed on that concept. But for me, I can't really help you with that. I have to tell you, there are things about the Persian Bayan that I consider to be mysteries that I will probably not know about, except maybe in the next world. And I'm satisfied with that, because there's so much to me that is readily comprehensible, that even sometimes seems to my practical bent to be, gee, that makes sense. Why didn't I think of that before? Why don't people do that all the time? And so to me, that the preponderance for me of the revelation speaks to a mind that is not informed by esoteric study, and that's good. And actually, Baha'u'llah talks about this in the Kitab-i-Agan. He says that the most important laws of the revelation of God in every dispensation are those which everyone can understand. They are fully comprehensible, because he said, if that were not the case, how could those who do not follow those laws be held accountable by God for not doing so? How could they become a divine standard if they were incomprehensible? Now, that doesn't mean that we understand why. Sometimes we have no idea why. As I pointed out about this, for example, the shaving of the head, the teachings of the Bab and then the teachings of Baha'u'llah. We don't know why. Maybe we'll never know why. But we know that he says to do something. It's not as if we read the book and we say, well, what does he mean by shaving the head? Does he mean shaving the head once a day, or shaving the no, you understand? We're always looking for a loophole. Or in this case, I like shaving my head. So I'm somebody who's looking for a loophole that says you could shave your head once a month, or once a week or something, or whenever you feel like it. But the fact that he says, don't shave your head with no explanation, it challenges me, because my free will is very precious to me. And he just told me, do it. Do it. Don't ask why, because I'm not going to tell you. Just do it. And there are tremendous lessons in that kind of obedience, and in that kind of disobedience. When we don't get it, we don't understand that you don't have to understand something all the way in order to do it. So here are some of the teachings that have to do with observing the visit to the place of the Bab's martyrdom. By the way, in all likelihood, in the future, when it's possible to do this safely in Iran, a lot of these visits to the house of the Bab, for example, and visit to the place of the martyrdom of the Bab, in the place of the martyrdom of of the hands of the letters of the living, Sheikh Tabarsi. These things will probably become regular occurrences for Baha'is, but obviously not now. I wanted to point out that he had revealed a version of the golden rule in this particular Vahid, so that if you ever want to say that the Bab also taught the golden rule, you know where to find it. Let's see, then we're going to 13. Okay, these are more teachings real about the commemoration of his birth and his death. So the honoring, the commemoration of the birth and death of the Bab, which we know as a Baha'i law, as a Baha'i holy day, originates in the Persian Bayan. The Bab right here says that we are to do this. We are to commemorate those occasions. Let's see, then 14. Yeah, so the latter part of this is about the two states of either affirmation or negation. That this is really the choice of anybody in the coming of the new manifestation. And it's particularly important in the day of the manifestation. That is when the manifestation is alive on earth. There is a very important shift that occurs. And you're either with him or you're not with him. And later on, things get a little bit more nuanced because he's not there. He's not right in front of you. You know, you don't have the opportunity to actually meet him. But I want to go back to the beginning of this because, of course, all of us are very curious about to know why are we supposed to read 700 verses? Okay. And if we can't read 700 verses, why are we supposed to mention God, that is to say the name of God, 700 times a day? Why? And I have no answer for you. I've never found Baha'u'llah answering this question. I've never found Abdul Baha addressing it. Certainly never found Chogi Effendi either. I don't think we have an answer. But if you're really curious, keep an open mind and something may come. We do have a few people in the Baha'i community who are very interested in the science of hurufat, of abjad, of the symbolic meanings. And they're doing all kinds of study of numbers and tracing them back to words, as well as words and tracing them to numbers. And maybe someday somebody will decipher this in a way that makes a lot of sense. But I don't think we need to worry about it, honestly, because he's giving a certain quantity. Well, what are 700 verses? In the actual text of the Persian Bayan, he has described what is a verse. How long is a verse? A verse is one line of text, and he says how many characters it is. Okay, so you might say, wow, 700 lines sounds like a lot. That's a lot of work. And we're supposed to do that every day? Not only every day, he says from the Bayan each day and night. That sounds awfully like doing it twice a day. Well, Baha'u'llah lets us off the hook. In the Kitabi Aqdas, he gives us the same commandment. Read the verses of God every morning and every night. Whoever does not do that is not being faithful to the covenant of God. It's very emphatic words. But He does not tell you how many verses you have to read. Instead, he says reading lots of verses is of no benefit. What's of benefit is to read some verses with love in your heart, with attraction, divine attraction. It's got to have a spiritual impact on you. And the quality of your communion with God using the word of God is what's important, not the number. So I'm not going to go any further than that, because I think that Baha'u'llah's word is the final word on this. Let's go on to 15. All right, this is very interesting, because generally Baha'is have understood that the Bab allowed bigamy as a principle. No, that's not true. The Bab allowed a couple who could not have a child if the person in the couple who was infertile, who was the reason why they couldn't have a child, gave permission, then the member of the couple who was fertile could take another partner so that they could have a child. That's the meaning of this teaching. So it's not about bigamy at all. It's about being able to have a child. And as we know, in our time, the opportunities for couples to have a child, if one of the two people is infertile, are quite numerous. There's surrogacy, there's I can't remember the name, but there are surgical procedures that can be followed. And so there is no need to take another partner in order to have a child. But the principle, I think, is a very beautiful one, because the principle is that every marriage should have the opportunity to result in having children. Children are a blessing beyond comparison. And the Bab wants the joy of having children to be within the realm of every person. So let's not get tied up in the technical vocabulary here. At the time that he wrote this, all of the fertility treatments that are currently available were not available. And surrogacy was not available. Nobody had even thought about doing something like that. So now there's a very strict law in the Bayan that if you are a Babi, you are only allowed to marry a fellow Babi. And it's very strict, and it also it's rather difficult for Baha'is to understand, because we see Baha'u'llah encouraging us to marry people of different faiths and not necessarily Baha'is. And we see the family as the formative institution of any community, and hence, if we're going to bring together humanity, we can't just become this closed group that procreates and creates more Baha'is, because it's too slow. It's not going to reach enough people that way. We need to be open to interfaith marriage, and certainly Baha'i law permits it. But consider the conditions of the Babis. The Babis were surrounded by Muslims. If they were to marry a Muslim, the Babi is a heretic. He is putting his entire family, his wife, and any children he would have, and their relatives in mortal danger of being killed, because they're associating with an infidel, with an apostate. So consider that, and also consider that the Babi community, although in a certain manner, it was very widespread community, in the actual numbers of committed believers, there were small community. If they didn't marry other Babis and bring up their children as Babis, would there be any Babis? Would there be any future for their religion? He wanted them to have this consciousness that you have a moment in history right now. And that moment in history is that you need to spread this faith. And the best way to spread this faith is to marry somebody who is of this faith, bring up children in this faith, and then go and teach this faith to the world. At the end of 15, you have what for us may not seem particularly relevant, but for Muslims, it was revolutionary. In the time of Islam, you have one invocation to God. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim ar-Rahman. That's what you have. That's it, my friends. And you say Allahu Akbar to all of your Muslim friends. In the radicalness of the Bab is by the time that he is revealing the Persian Bayan, he's making so clear that this is a new revelation from God. We are not doing things the way we did them in the past. We now say Bismillah al-Amna al-Aqdas, which is a reference to what? It's very interesting. It's a reference to Baha'u'llah, because that is why his book would be called Kitab al-Aqdas, the most holy book. In 16, you have what will become the Huququllah, okay, the 19% tax. And if you notice, one of the things that it says is that the Huququllah goes to the Bab, and then it goes to the 18 letters of the living. In the Kitabi Aqdas, Baha'u'llah says, in the time when he is present in the world, the Huququllah comes to him. After him, it goes to the Ahsan. Who are the Ahsan? The Ahsan are the line of appointed male descendants of Baha'u'llah. It started with Abdul Baha, but then it was Shoghi Effendi, and it was intended to be a line of successors similar to the Imams. So you have this teaching of the Huququllah, which is reiterated in a slightly different form in the Kitabi Aqdas. Let's go to 17. By the way, how are we doing for time?
We're good. We still have about 42 minutes.
Awesome, awesome. Okay, good. I think there'll be plenty of time to have a discussion afterwards. Here's talking about taxation. And 47 is going to be a stretch for us. We're Americans. From the time we're little, we're taught that slavery is evil. Owning slaves is evil. That kings are autocratic. That we look forward to a world in which there are fewer rich and more poor, or at least sort of an equalization of income. So it's possible for everybody to live in good health and in dignity. So these are our values. So then when we read here and he says, as a believer, you must be satisfied with whatever God has ordained for you, whether you're rich or poor, a king or subject, illustrious or ignorant, learned or ignorant is really what it should say, a slave or a master. It's very hard for us to read that. What is he talking about? That's going backwards. I can't believe that. Again, I think we have to look at this in a couple of ways. One is the moment in which this is revealed. The moment in which this is revealed is that the big change, the huge societal change that's right around the corner is being brought in by him whom God shall make manifest. Baha'u'llah's teachings are revolutionary. And I don't mean that in any sort of a limited sense. I don't mean that they're different. I don't mean that they're cool. I mean that they turn things upside down, and intentionally so, because we've been going the wrong way for millennia. We've misunderstood most of what the manifestations have taught us, and then applied our misunderstandings and called that religion. So what Baha'u'llah tells us to do is he says, no, you have to actually understand the word of God and implement it. And then you are going to have a whole new kind of society. And by the way, when you go and you read the scriptures of your religion or your previous religion, if you've converted to the faith, you will find that those scriptures say the same thing I'm teaching. Most of my teachings are universal and perennial teachings. But that is something that people have never understood. And hence, for millennia, we've been fighting with each other about who was right and who was wrong, and who is blessed and who's going to hell. And so this particular teaching had a time, and the time was, as Bobbies, you need to be satisfied with where you are. You're not going to be revolutionaries. That's going to be ushered in by him whom God shall make manifest. And the way he does it is because the poor become rich and the rich become poor. The kings are dethroned and the masses are made the decision makers. And the ignorant are found to be full of insight, and the learned are found to be full of nonsense. And the slaves are liberated, and the masters are turned into just regular folks that have to work for a living. This is what Baha'u'llah did. He turned it upside down. But the Bab doesn't tell us that. He doesn't tell us that's going to happen. He does warn us that you better be ready because it's going to be big, right? And in fact, in a previous Bab, in this Vahid, he does talk about the Great Reversal, which was given that name by Sheikh Ahmad. And the Great Reversal is about, in every dispensation, and I quote Isaiah, every valley shall be exalted, and every mountain shall be made level. So you have that principle of the overturning of the order of things in every religion. But the Bab is not rocking the boat here. It's funny because we tend to think that the Bab is the one who rocks the boat, and Baha'u'llah is the calm, everything is peaceful and loving. And I think we've missed out. We've not understood. Yes, in some ways the Bab was revolutionary because he was breaking with Islam. But in other ways, he was keeping things relatively under wraps until it was time for Baha'u'llah to really change the whole of society. So 49, you'll see jihad was approved in the Bobby dispensation. But another thing that's been pointed out by a number of people is jihad is approved, that is, Bobby kings can go about conquering other countries and can go about encouraging people to become Bobbies. But, very interesting, throughout the Persian Bayan, he says you must never use force. You must never make people even unhappy. If you do this, you're breaking my law. So the only way we can possibly reconcile these two ideas is that jihad is struggle to spread the cause of God. And that is one of the meanings of jihad. It is to teach the cause of God so that you go and you convert the world. But the Bab leaves it ambiguous. And he does talk about kings, and he talks about conquering, and he talks about all those people who are living in particular areas. There's 7 realms in which the majority of the population are Imami Shi'i Muslims, and that all of those should become Babi. Yes, you have that, but you also have this teaching that it has to be done peacefully, and it has to be done through your example of your holy life and through your words. So it's not either or in the case of the Bab. And in the case of Baha'u'llah, it's one thing. It's only by your words and your conduct are you allowed to spread the faith. You cannot use force. Let's see, then note 50 is reiterating concepts that we've seen before. And then here in 18, he's talking a lot about the fast. Yep. And the fast, very similar to the fast rules in the Kitab-i-Aqdas and other writings of Baha'u'llah. Of course, the believer begins fasting at the age of 15 for Baha'u'llah, and he must continue fasting until the age of 70. Whereas in the Persian Bayan, it's 11 and 42. The concept of, the age of human maturity has been determined according to different numbers by different religions over the course of time. And Baha'u'llah got it, in the Kitab-i-Aqdas, he really nailed it as far as what seems to be likely for human beings of the present and probably far into the future. Because at 15, we're pretty close to being able to assume adult responsibilities if we're being raised correctly. I remember having a wonderful conversation with a head of a rabbinical school in Jerusalem, and he had a picture of his daughter at her marriage, and his daughter and her husband. And I asked him, how old was she when she got married? And he said she was 16. I mean, 16? Really? Oh my gosh, that seems so young. How could she be mature enough and choose a good partner at that age? And he looked at me and he smiled and he said, spiritual maturity has nothing to do with age. And I shut my mouth because I thought, yeah, look, if you're a good enough dad that you can bring up your children to be ready for marriage at that age, and they manage to have a really good marriage at that age, and it sticks, all power to you. We have something to learn from you. So let's go to 19. 19, Friday. The Bob reaffirms the day of coming together, Jum'ah, of the Islamic calendar. Every Friday is when they come together at the mosque, pray together, and that day is consecrated basically to God. And so, in a sense, Friday has become the Sabbath for the Muslim community, and the Bab reiterates this, that it is to be the day of commemoration of God, the special day of his commemoration, as well in the Babi faith. And I think it's very interesting here. What does he say? He says, on this day you are to make mention of him whom God shall make manifest, and his letters, that is the people he will appoint to carry on his faith after him. 202 times. These are the two things that you're supposed to do. 202 times, him whom God shall make manifest. And then you are to say, Ya Allah, which is commemorating God, 4,000 times on that day. To me, the contrast between these things, the fact that he mentions him whom God shall make manifest at all on this day of God, of commemoration of God, is very important. It makes it an indispensable part of your worship, is to be looking forward to the next manifestation. And then we've seen laws about Friday before in other Babs. So someday somebody will collect all of them and correlate them and then compare them to the Baha'i teachings and to Islamic teachings, and then we'll learn more about how they all fit together. But I would point out that Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Babism, and the Baha'i faith all have a Sabbath. All of them. The Sabbath is on a different day. That's it. And after all, who's been counting the days since the creation? Who really knows which day is the Sabbath? None of us, obviously. So the tradition of having one day a week that you specially turn to God and you make it his day and you commemorate him in everything you do. This is something that's shared between all of these Abrahamic faiths. And this is one of our, this was one of the ways in which we are going to find our unity, is because we're all doing the same thing, even though we're doing it at different times. Then, of course, there's this reiteration of the manifestation of God as being the intermediary between God and his creation. You know, we often find this in the beginning and in the end of the writings of the Bab and Baha'u'llah, is this reminder of the structure of reality. It's very important for us to be reminded of this, because we have a direct link to God, but it's not direct. It's through an intermediary. That is the reality. And when we operate without having that in our consciousness, when we seek something from the structure of reality that does not come to us through that, through some other means. You know, when we think, oh, well, I could just talk to God directly and he'll listen to me and he'll grant my wishes because he's merciful. we don't really grasp the reality is that he created the manifestation of God to serve that function, to be our go-between. I think that the people who have the closest understanding of what this meaning, what it means for there to be an intermediary between God and creation are Christians. I think Christians really do understand that without Jesus, we don't have a relationship directly with God. And that relationship with Jesus is a relationship with God. And so Baha'is have, in a sense, a lot to learn from Christians about this, because so many Muslims have pushed aside Muhammad and not made him central. They've made the Quran central, all right, to their religiosity. But the Quran, the word of God without the manifestation, is deprived of personality. It's deprived of the personhood of this connection with God. And how do we get to really loving God who isn't a person? This is our challenge. Whenever we only love God by loving his commandments, we become bigots. We become sticklers for details, and we miss out on the big picture. So that is my sermon for the day. And now I invite your questions, your challenges, your comments, and I believe we have at least 20 minutes.
Yes, that's we have yeah, it closes at 9, so we're almost at a little over 30 minutes, which is fine. We'll head it off a little earlier tonight. I don't see any raised hands, but if anyone has questions or comments, now's definitely the time to start.
Does that mean that you've all fallen asleep? Or you were so bored that you've been watching television the whole time?
I got a quick question.
Go for it.
What you said at the very end about bigots at the end, can you go over that last part again about only believing the Quran and not Muhammad, the effects of that again?
Well, I think we find it in all of the cases of all of the manifestations. The manifestations is our intermediary with God. The word of God is what he reveals and he leaves behind when he goes. But the manifestation is the living presence of the intermediation. And so when Baha'u'llah says, he says, for example, if there are any of my followers who disagree and are arguing with each other, turn to me and see me before you. This is a quote from Baha'u'llah. And this is what I'm talking about, the living presence of the manifestation, because he's permeating, his reality permeates every world. Even though physically he's not here, he is here spiritually. We can turn to him and we can be guided by him and we can receive his blessing and his love. And so my point being that when the Bab actually talks about this in one of his books called The 7 Proofs. He says, those people who become, there is such a thing as to become overly fastidious in your observance of the law because you've missed the boat. You came to understand or believe that the means to your salvation is the instrument, but it's not. The instrument is the pathway that is left behind by the one who is the way. The way is the manifestation. And the word of God is what he leaves behind to guide us to him. And then through him, we go to God.
So one of the questions that I was looking at, because when you have the mullahs and all these things that they do all these meetings, and you always see them on the news where there's thousands of people, and there's always one talking. Is the mullah replacing basically Muhammad, or is he doing the words of Muhammad? I was kind of curious how you have 9,000 people in a room all pointed one way and they're all saying the same thing. There's one guy on a pedestal.
Okay.
It's kind of curious how that relates back to what they're saying. They're not really following Muhammad. Are they just going through the motions with the mullah?
All right. So there are two things they're doing. One of them is if they're praying, they're following the leader of prayer, who is called an imam. The imam is the guy who's hired to go in the front of the mosque, and he leads everybody else in prayer. But the prayer is being carried out by everybody in the entire mosque. You know, it's a unison prayer. The prayer is always a collective prayer of the ummah, of the people of Islam. This is one of the radically different things about the Baha'i faith, is because we do not have any collective prayer, except for the prayer for the dead. And even that one, there are very specific rules about how it's to be carried out. But our prayer is between individuals and God. And we use, in most of our prayers, we're using the actual words revealed by Baha'u'llah to affect that relationship with God. So then, number one, the imam who leads the prayer. He's not the only one praying. They're all praying, but he's leading it, okay? The other thing are the ulama, sometimes called mullah, called mujtahid, called ayatollah, depending who, you know, what their rank is and which religious order they're part of. They have different names. What these guys are is they're preachers. They're preachers. They give their understanding of a particular teaching of Islam, a particular passage in the Quran, and they do their best to convince their followers, which means the people at their particular mosque, or if they're big cheese, that may be a whole bunch of different mosques that are following the same leader. So what they do is they give sermons, and then everybody goes, oh, so that's what we're supposed to believe. And that kind of belief in the intermediation between the manifestation and the word of God on the one hand, and the individual believer, that kind of belief is called taqlid. Taqlid in Arabic. And taqlid in Arabic means imitation. It is a core principle of Islam, all Islam, and especially in a very ritualized fashion for Imami Islam. That is for the Islam that is predominant in Iran, Afghanistan, and a few other, Lebanon, and a few other places. In this particular Islam especially, but in all Islam, they imitate the preacher. The preacher, the Ayatollah, the mullah, is for them the one who tells them what to believe, what to do. Because what? How many of the people have read the Quran? How many of them read it regularly? How many of them have read the great legal codes that were written in the Middle Ages that are directing the legal behavior of Muslims all over the world? Islam is a very, very law-abiding community, and it's very detailed, and you have to go to school for many, many years before you're qualified in Islamic tradition to actually lead a community to do the right thing. So again, this is completely thrown out by Baha'u'llah, because he says, no, there's no clergy in this religion. Go read the book. Find out for yourself what the book says, and then do it. And nobody's going to tell you to do it. Nobody has any right to. It's none of their business. You do it. It's your job. So obviously, the Baha'is are an enormous threat to the livelihood of thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of Muslims who are professionals. They make their living at this. They spend their lives doing this, telling people what to believe and what to do. And these Baha'is come along, and not only do they say a new messenger of God has appeared, the greatest ever, but not only that, but they say, and he's revealed a new book. What? We're not supposed to follow the Quran anymore? So that's number two. And then number three is all you guys are out of a job. We don't need you. And
That's
you
what-
See,
want-
that's what confused me. Yeah, that how
Yeah.
that all worked. Makes much
You're-
more sense.
Exactly.
you.
You're all out of a job and you're never going to work again.
That's why they'll never agree. They'll never
They'll never,
look down his path.
well, they will, but the only ones who will is because they will be touched by the Holy Spirit and they will be changed. And this has happened. One of the things, if you go back and read the Kitab-i-Gan, you will find a whole list of mullahs who became Babis. And Baha'u'llah lists all those people because of the extraordinary fact that that many people in that short period of time went from being leading members of the clergy to becoming Babis. That took guts, that took transformation. And I don't know if you've met people like that, but I've met a number of people who were priests, who were pastors, who were monks, who were nuns, and they became Baha'is. So it is possible, but they have to be touched by the Spirit because the change is such a huge one.
Peter, the Dawnbreakers really shows that that change, and it shows the reality of what it takes for someone from that culture, specifically from the clerics, to become a Babi. We do have a couple of comments from YouTube, so I want to go ahead and read those off to you real quick, and then we can go to Alex because I know he had a question. One of the comments was not, I think it's partly a comment and a comment. It was not understanding why something is required is in the category of when Muhammad changed the direction of prayer from Jerusalem to Mecca. It's a kind of test to the believers. So I believe I'm not really 100% sure if that's a question or if it's a comment. Can you elaborate anything in regards to what it means to change, like for instance, when they changed the direction of prayer?
Well, sure. I'll give you a great example. I think it's a very good example. In the Kitab-i-Aqdas, it says the Bab is, Baha'u'llah is reiterating the teaching of the Bab, who says, but very cryptically, very briefly, he says, man may take two wives. He's referencing this particular passage in the Persian Bayan, which is talking about under certain circumstances, you may take a second spouse. But it's very short. He just says you may take two wives. And then Abdul Baha wrote a tablet in which he said, the intention, God's intention, is because you can only take two wives if you can treat them both with justice, and you can't, that therefore the monogamy is prescribed by Baha'u'llah. Now, as you can imagine, there were some problems with that one. There were some Persian Baha'is maybe Arab Baha'is too, who had understood ever since they first became believers from an Islamic background, and maybe it was more than one generation. They had understood that they could take 2 wives. And they had also understood it in the classic sense in which the Quran had been interpreted in the past, is that men may take more than 1 wife, but women cannot take more than 1 husband. You see, the Bab already threw that upside down in the Persian Bayan, where he says the person who can be a parent can take another mate in order to have a child. That was the principle that he described. And so it didn't make it based upon your being a man, being masculine in gender. So, but you can imagine for somebody who's brought up in classical Islam, where the privileges are all in the man's, column, he gets all of them. The traditional understanding of Islam is not only can you have 4 wives, but you can have as many concubines as you can afford. And if you happen to be Imami Shi'i Muslim, you may have a temporary wife whenever it's convenient. Okay? You can go and have a wife when you go on pilgrimage or when you go on a business trip. And you don't have any commitment to that person besides the time that you're spending them. And this is completely legal in Imami Islam, Imami Shi'i Islam. There's a law permitting it. It's even has a name. It's called Sige. The Sige is the temporary wife. Well, Abdul Baha, by interpreting Baha'u'llah in this way, has made monogamy the absolute law for Baha'is. And not only did he do that, he said something that is absolutely shocking. He said that the Quran's original intention was monogamy. Woo! Guys, this is mind-blowing. Here is Abdul Baha saying, no, we were meant always to have only 1 spouse. And I actually collected all the passages I could find on this and wrote an article for Baha'i Teachings. So if you'd like to delve into that question, I invite you to go to Baha'i Teachings, look up Peter Terry, and you'll find that article. And I think you'll like it. I do. I really do. I was so astonished because having studied Islam and as an undergraduate and a graduate and done a lot of reading, I thought I knew my Islam. And here it was that Abdul Baha in this tablet was saying, no, you never got it, did you? The Quran was calling for monogamy. And it was the understanding of Muslims that it was calling for polygamy. But that understanding was wrong.
Alex, if you would like, please ask your question now.
Yes, good evening. So my question is about the Bismillah of the Bab. We've talked about it before, and you mentioned it a little while ago. So I had always heard about this or read about it throughout my Baha'i life, and you mentioned those words Bismillah here, Amna, Hil, Akdas, something like that, in the name of God, the inaccessible, the most holy. Mm-hmm. So my understanding of it was that this was a way for the Bab to radically differentiate his writings, his revelation from the Bismillah used in the Quran. Yeah. And I had always assumed that it was going to be used maybe at the beginning of each Vahid, something like that in the Persian Bayan. But have I missed its use in the Persian Bayan, or where does he use that, his new Bismillah in his writings?
I believe that Bismillah is at the very beginning of the preludium, of the preface that the Bab wrote to the Persian Bayan. I believe so. Okay. I go back and look. I believe it's also found in the very beginning of the Dalail Sabeh, which is the 7 proofs, and other tablets that he wrote. But the just because he is bringing in a new Bismillah doesn't mean he's going to repeat it the same way it was repeated in the Quran.
Okay.
That wasn't his purpose at all.
Mhm.
The purpose was like a sledgehammer, wham. I just started with something that's totally different. You never heard it before.
Mm.
And this is what happened in Shiraz. If you go, this is described in the Dawnbreakers, where one of his letters of the living was sent to give a sermon in a mosque in Shiraz, and he opened with this new Bismillah. Woo! Okay. Explosion, right? And this same letter of the living later, at the bequest of the Babs, brought his faith to Constantinople, brought it to the leaders of the Sunni. He's already blown the minds of the Imami Muslims, right? The ones who follow the 12 Imams. Then he went to the headquarters of the Sultan of the Sunni branch of Islam, which was in Istanbul, and there he disappeared. We don't know anything about what happened to him. But the important thing was he went there and he definitely proclaimed the prophethood of the Bab, and he definitely used that azan. And so we know that it made its way, and we also know that it made its way to Mecca and Medina, because the Bab and Qudus went to Mecca and Medina.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions from anyone inside the Zoom? If not, there's a couple of comments that I can go to from online, but no questions specifically, Peter.
I know, I told you they're all watching television. No, I'm teasing you. I'm teasing you because if you've stuck with reading this book with me for this long, I know you're serious. I know you're dedicated, and I know you really love what you're reading. So, that makes us very close friends, and I really appreciate that you're still here.
The night that you were sick, Peter, if no one told you, we all stayed on for, I don't know, an hour and 15 minutes at least.
Wow.
And affirmed what you just said, which is this has just been such a delight and a mystical immersion. And when you get to the end of what you do, we're all just can't even find the words to speak, but this has been so meaningful for all of us. So, and it was fun for us to get to talk amongst ourselves and to just share in the joy of being in this class.
Wonderful. That's really wonderful. And thank you for letting me know that, Alex. And we should definitely, Jeremiah, we should definitely plan to have a supplementary session at the end, when we finish, for, in either the next week or, maybe time it in whatever way is convenient for you, so that we have a chance to, sort of have a party. Bring out the cake and ice cream.
We completed the book. We have 2 more sessions, I think, and then we'll be able to. And actually, the second one is probably going to be so we really only have 1 more session, and then I think we're finished up. But as of right now, I don't see any more questions. So if we don't have any more questions, I think it's a good stopping point, and then we will just pick up again next week. Remember that all the resources you need for this are on the website and they're linked below. Actually, I will link them in the chat. And they'll be attached to the videos as well, so that people, when they're watching the video, they can get directly to it. So if there are no other questions, then I will say good night to you all. Thank you all for being here. And we look forward to seeing you next Wednesday. That's the 27th.
Yes. Have a wonderful week.
Good night. Bye.
Good night,
Hello,
everyone.
friends. Bye-bye.
Love.